Well, I'm delighted to be with you. As we think about the anti-communism aspect of the John Birch Society, I got to thinking back. My father, fought the communists. And my father was an Army officer beginning 1942, and ended up being in counterintelligence. So counterintelligence in the Army, of course, keeps our secrets, makes sure that all the appropriate protections in our military installations and our contract operations for private industry are protected, and also to be sure that we're not invaded by the communists in our society and in the military especially. I got involved with this many, many years ago because I'm a member of John Birch Society, by the way, paid my dues. I've been getting the New American for a long time, so I'm not just somebody cruising in, to sell books and stuff, but I'm a member of this group, and I'm supportive of everything. I've known about the group for a long time. And in the 70s, when I lived in Dallas, the John Birch Society had a bookstore down in the uptown area of Dallas, and I got into all the books, Quigley's book, you name it, I bought them all, and I read them all, and I still have them in my library. I have Thompson's two major books and so forth, and so I've known a lot about this for a long time. I didn't really delve into it. I retired 15 years ago from the Dallas VA Medical Center, and I started to get into these topics again, and so I started studying it 4 years ago. So the product of what I'm going to talk about, just to kind of whet your appetite to get the book for $20, hopefully, so I don't have to carry that heavy suitcase back to Dallas, relates to the different people that I call the usual suspects. And so I'm just going to kind of go quickly into the major topics that I cover in this book. That, like I said, I spent an intensive 4 years researching plus writing this book. So there's a lot of work in it. I will never get back the money that I put in. That's not why I've done it. I've done it for education. This group is a group for education, for against communism and globalism, New World Order, et cetera, and which I'm into and which that book is all about. It's the shared purpose of me and my contributor, who's a fellow Vietnam vet, both of whom have shed soldiers' blood, to relate the true and apparent behind-the-scenes manipulations and movements propagated by people I call plutocrats to serve their financial needs, economic motivations, greed, and the lust for power. For these selfish purposes, we young patriots and other innocent civilians sacrifice our lives. We call them collateral damage. That's a nice politically correct term, but they get killed when we go off to war. We kill some of them, and the enemy kills a lot of them too. Our limbs, our blood, and sometimes our very minds and emotions to fulfill their ambitions, bank accounts, and positions of power. And I agonized how these cooperative business endeavors could have been accomplished many times to the detriment of my very comrades in the profession of arms. But I learned a lot about it, and that's what's in the book. Charles Higham, in his Trading with the Enemy, answered my questions and expressed the big picture when he wrote that individuals were introduced to the idea of a world community of money that would be independent of wars and empires. He went on to speak of certain high-level American business people, who I name in my book, who shared views on international financial solidarity, intent on fulfilling their own financial, economic, or spiritual purposes through cooperative efforts. When I started doing this 4 years ago, I said, well, I'm going to incorporate everything. I'm not going to pull any punches on this. I said, I've got to get it all out there because I'm 77. I don't know how many more years I'm going to have, and if I don't get it out now, it may never get out. I've just got to get it out and pour it out. Then my third chapter relates to the New World Order, the Illuminati, and all these people. Now this is, when I started doing these speeches, this book just came out. It's self-published, by the way, too controversial. And so I go through all the different, what I call usual suspects that have got us into wars. The media people, the politicians, the arms merchants, you name it. And I go through Protestantism and Catholicism and Judaism. I figure I'm going to make everybody mad, But the fact is that I've told what I've learned about history, okay? And I don't pull any punches. And I said, you know, what have I got to lose? People are too politically correct. They're worried about hurting people's feelings, you know. One of the problems in the political arena is that that people don't go after people in their own party or with their own philosophy and so forth because they're friends and they owe them things, they got them jobs, and they wrote resumes for them, you know, and helped them advance in their careers. So people keep their mouths shut about things. Well, I've got nothing to lose at this point in time. Another of my favorite authors is Curtis Dahl. I think he was very close to the John Birch Society later in life, but he was originally the son-in-law of President and Mrs. FDR, you know, Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, lived in the White House. Now, his wife divorced him in '35, had a good enough relationship with FDR that he stayed and lived in the White House. And she got married to somebody, some newspaper guy up in Washington State. But I learned a lot in his book. And he said, my book is dedicated to young Americans. May you benefit from observing how certain shadowy forces contrive to ruthlessly advance their own financial and ideological objectives at your expense. They select, then groom, and ultimately control many of our highest government officials. And I go after CFR, okay? I don't pull any punches on CFR, okay? Council on Foreign Relations. I mean, all 3,000 members can't be a part of any kind of conspiracy or anything, okay? But a lot of secret societies, people at the lower levels, they don't know what the heck's going on. But as you go up the pyramid, the people at the top know what the heck is going on. And CFR is that, in my opinion, okay? And I have quotes in there by an admiral that, you know, wrote a book with Phyllis Schlafly years ago. They select, then groom, and ultimately control many of our highest government officials. They plan the wars and through foreign policy arrange to set the stage for incidents to initiate hostilities, false flags. Many sacred cows will be explored in my book, as I have, including major money center bankers, Wall Street lawyers, City of London financiers, politicians, presidents, people of both Gentile and Jewish heritage, members of various faith walks, unscrupulous capitalists, propagandists, media moguls, and captains of industries who profit from wars. No work on topics about sources of oil wars and lending to governments to finance wars should leave unmentioned controversial families such as the Rothschilds of Europe, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Fords, and the Dulles family of the United States. These usual suspects have been written about as participants in the conspiracy theory of history, which I've studied and know a lot about. Okay, I've gotten into all this stuff. I've been really concerned about the influence of cabals and elitists, and that's a major thesis in my book. Francis J. Schaeffer wrote a book in 1976, and I saw him at SMU one time. He wrote a 1976 book and had a video, which I've seen also. An elite and authoritarianism as such will gradually force form on society so that it will not go into chaos. He writes an incredible book, and that's the thing that's going to happen, because we are just going to be so sick and tired of wars, so sick and tired of all the animosity, you know, especially in our own country. And I'll be candid with you, I'm going to say it right now, I don't call the Democrats the loyal opposition, which is usually what you try to do in politics. They are the disloyal opposition in the United States of America, no doubts about it. Others took part in the concerted effort in secular world history through the action of being participants in larger conspiracies, wittingly or unwittingly. But an example taken from the Boer Wars, which is not in this book, but you know I know about, a plan by elitists to foster a controlled world, possibly being defined by the much repudiated concept by the enemy of one world government, came out through a statement made in 1891 by Cecil Rhodes. Rhodes, who amassed a fortune in South Africa diamond and gold mines, stated, "The only feasible way to carry this idea out is a secret one. Society gradually absorbing the wealth of the world to be devoted to such an object." And he did a very good job of that. You know, some examples of elitists who have referred to these terms about the New World Order. Henry Kissinger's book is titled World Order. Duh. President George H.W. Bush, in whose administration I served, talked about New World Order. Strobe Talbot, who is definitely one of them, Assistant Secretary of State, and this, I can't even pronounce his name, Zbigniew Brzezinski, an advisor to President Jim Carter and President Bill Clinton for sure. Presidential candidate Barack Obama stated on July 24, 2008, that he supported a globalized world. Well, that's fine. You know, You have to have trade, and you have to have imports, you have to have exports, you have to have allies, you have to have all this stuff, but not to have a one world government. You know, I don't want to give up our sovereignty. I know that's a lot of what you all believe in. David Rockefeller, in his own autobiography memoir, said this: "Some even believe that we, Rockefeller family, are a member of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family as me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's a charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it." The Illuminati. A most complete reference for one Adam is Adam Weishaupt, you know, the reputed founder of the modern-day Illuminati. There's a 1921 book by Nesta Webster titled World Revolution, or the Plot Against Civilization. She goes into that in tremendous detail about the foundations of the Illuminati. Everything that is good in America will be badmouthed by people that don't want to have this in America. The good stuff in America. The sovereignty, the free enterprise system, the freedom from control by outsiders and so forth, freedom controlled by people in the United States that try to tear us down. And the socialists, that's the new name, socialists, you know. They're just communists on deck. You know, that's all. Like in baseball, you got your on deck, you're going to come and play pretty soon. They're just socialists now. They're going to be communists. It's interesting that May 1st every year is the foundation of the Illuminati, which was announced on May 1st, 1776, 2 months before our Declaration of Independence. This is the day that the communists celebrate all over the world. It is also important to recognize from the initiation of the Illuminati that it was based on a goal of world domination. The eventual aim of it, which was to remain unrevealed to the lower level initiates. The members were expected to hide the term Illuminati. Espionage was a major tenet of the movement. Soon after its formation, there was an agreement made with one of the branches of Freemasonry to coordinate their efforts. Religion for the Illuminati, all love of country and loyalties to sovereigns were to be annihilated and gotten rid of. Would it be too far-fetched to speculate that what we are witnessing today in our world could be the culmination of a steady drive of this organization to accomplish its purposes, to usurp and remove Christianity and national sovereignty through secrecy, espionage, deception, and concealment? Now, speaking about these different things, I was in espionage in Vietnam, okay? I was an intelligence officer, but I wore infantry brass, had a false name, false ID. I debriefed a double agent. A Cambodian officer defected to the United States, probably a triple agent, maybe was assassinated, killed after I left country. Front page of the New York Times. I interviewed his defense lawyer, told him about the initiation of the operation in which that guy was involved, and I've lived with Cambodian anti-communists for 3 months in safe houses in Saigon. I'm all aware, I understand espionage, what these people have been trying to do to us. The usual suspects that are fulfilling the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation right in front of our blinded eyes. A discussion of these groups usually encompasses the Round Table, the Council on Foreign Relations, the United Nations, the Bilderberg Society, and the Trilateral Commission. Wading through all these groups presents a never-ending and puzzling series of enigmas. I mean, it just drives you nuts trying to keep up with all these people. The three basic motives exist for those involved in this myriad of endeavors, and I talk about that to a greater extent. After, you know, the League of Nations didn't work after World War I because we had some patriots in this country, okay? Some patriots that had guts to go do what they should have done. Well, they disappeared after World War II. United Nations was set up by a communist, Alger Hiss. The World Bank, Bank for International, whatever, IRD, whatever it is, set up by another communist. You know, Harry Hopkins lived in the White House for 3 months. He was a communist. I mean, you know, all these people, FDR's administration, especially through Eleanor, bunch of communists. I mean, you know, how many people know that we recognized Soviet Russia after the Bolshevik Revolution, 1933? 1933, that early. That got all the communists into our country. Now, I don't cover that in this book. I just found out about that, the date the other day, because I read something else by Diana West about how the communists started emphasizing our organizations in this country. They were just all over the place, you know, and they were called red herrings, and you know, after World War II. They infiltrated our society. The Russians really put a job on FDR, who was sick when he went to Yalta. Okay, he was sick, and his son-in-law, Dahl, talked about that. God, I need 3 hours, I'm sorry. John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles. I don't trust those guys, things they were doing. One thing I learned about the other day about Alan Dulles' son did go to the Korean War and was severely wounded and still is incapacitated because of a brain injury that he had. His sister was taking care of him till a few years ago after the Korean War. James Perloff in Shadows of Power, which is back there, I think, captured what Admiral Chester Ward, 20-year member of CFR, said. Once the ruling members of the CFR have decided that the U.S. government should adopt a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy and to confound and discredit intellectually and politically any opposition. And that's what's happened to John Birch Society. They have attacked the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society is one of the organizations, in my opinion, after decades of hard work, dedicated work by you patriots and partisans for what we should be involved with, works at what they should do. A bunch of people give lip service to everything. You all are right on top of it all. Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. Nations acquire additional property, and the general public shoulders the bill and taxes, but a bill that renders a horrible accounting of newly placed gravestones, which I'm aware of running the National Cemetery System, mangled bodies, shattered minds, broken hearts and homes, economic instability, and back-breaking taxation of the many for generations and generations. That's what wars cost us. And I got these quotes from Smedley Butler, two-time Medal of Honor recipient, and he was on top of these people into the 30s. I study arms merchants. I mean, you know, we had a Nye report in the 30s about the kinds of tricks and things that our arms merchants in our country, much less all over the world, have done. Arms merchants don't care. They just want to make their money. They'll sell to both sides. They'll sell to both sides. You know, they sold this new machine gun, the Gatling gun. They sold it, the machine gun, to the Boers down in South Africa, which started shooting up the redcoats, you know, when they came in to take over the gold and diamond mines and so forth down in South Africa. They didn't care. They just want to make their money. And they had Anglican bishops, and they had retired officers, and they had politicians on their boards and owned the stock. And that's the way the game is played. They give stock to people. The other day, you know, 5 or 6 people came out and said, oh, well, this Soleimani should have been killed, which he should have, believe me. You know, somebody asked me, he's a good guy or bad guy. I said, bad guy. He was responsible for the EFPs and IEDs that killed several hundred of our troops in Iraq during that conflagration and conflict and so forth. And he's a bad guy, no question about it. He was in charge, second most powerful guy in Iran. But I saw an article the other day, which is, I think, pretty interesting, that they had 5 people that they were talking about that were coming out. Oh, Soleimani was bad. It's a good idea that we got after. We got to arm ourselves or keep ourselves strong against Iran. They're all directors of defense contractors. Go figure. I mean, that's just a natural thing. They're going to go out there. They want to have wars. You know, I talk about, quote, Eisenhower in 1961, a week before he was getting out of office. Took that long to say it. He probably believed it before then about the military-industrial complex. Trump said the same thing last spring in an interview when he was trying to get us the heck out of the Middle East. You know, he says the defense contractors, these people, they want constant wars because they sell more. You know, dome situation, Israel with the Patriot missiles. Raytheon will sell more Patriot missiles, more bombs, more planes. You know, everything. And I want our military to be ready, you know, and the bottom line is I don't want us to have to go to wars, but that government, you know, we unfortunately have to because a lot of bad guys around. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop, you know. I mean, I'm aware of that, but, you know, I'm looking for something, and I have to talk about it, and I have to believe it. Maybe we could get out of it because I'm a guy that's suffered, you know, 20 operations, 15 months in the hospital, 8 or 9 years with post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, I'm a classic case of somebody that suffered from a war, but I got out of it by the grace of God. And, you know, in the middle 70s, I was able to stop seeing a psychiatrist. I hated those people, you know, but I had to see them. Stop seeing a psychiatrist. And Stopped taking pills 40 years ago, so I guess I'm a success figure. These bankers, starting with David Rockefeller Sr. and the Rothschilds, they've prospered immensely. Castles, palaces, ostentatious and luxurious mansions, enclaves and gated communities, and elegant homes pay tribute to their successes and prosperity throughout modern history. Quigley, one of the first books I bought at that bookstore, names the banking giants of history: Baring, Lazard, Erlanger, Warburg, Schroeder, Seligman, Spires, especially Rothschild and Morgan. I had a Jewish friend that got converted to Christianity in his 50s by watching Christian television, and he's deceased now, but died. But he filled me in on all the different Morgans and Rothschilds relative taking advantage of people. International bankers without particular national loyalties or regard for those used as cannon fodder communicated typically fund both sides of every war. After World War I, Quigley wrote, in addition to these pragmatic goals, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements, 5 miles from Germany in Switzerland. Okay? And if I do this second book, I'll have a whole chapter on them. They're a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks. The Nazis put their gold in there at the beginning of World War II. They were contacted in 1943 saying, we've got to start talking about this $343 million worth of gold that you have in your vaults at the Bank for International Settlements. Of course, where do they get it? They got it from the teeth of Jews. They got it from the paintings that they'd sold from the homes they'd confiscated from Jews. All the gold that they got from the vaults of the countries that they went into and overran. I just got madder and madder and madder when I studied this. There was only one power. I have a quote here from somebody who says, there was only one power in Europe, was a dictum well known about the middle of the 19th century, and that is Rothschild. A dozen other banks are his underlings. And the bank, the Bank of England, man, they've been right in the middle of all this stuff also. The original Rockefeller philanthropically supported educational operation was called the General Education Board. Rockefeller's head man in philanthropy was Reverend Frederick T. Gates, who was recruited for the American Baptist Education Society. In 1904, he wrote a passage in Occasional Paper No. 1, which I got a copy of, naturally, titled The Country School of Tomorrow, which set the groundwork for the attitude toward us peasants by John D. and his elitist compatriots. This was the original John D. Rockefeller. In our dreams, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We are not to raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryonic great artists, painters, musicians, on and on and on. Of course, these are the people that went off to fight in the trenches in World War I and get gassed and get killed and living in that mud. If you look at the movie 1917, which is up for an Academy Award, you can find out how bad it was in World War I. In other words, don't change their circumstances. Just leave them just the way they are. Curtis Dahl, back to him, he believed that only a small group of individuals managed to pick and back candidates from each party to ensure that in the end their interests would be supported by the eventual victor. He, as I mentioned earlier, was President FDR's son-in-law, once engaged in a personal conversation with Felix Frankfurter, then a law professor at Harvard Law School. Dahl wrote that Frankfurter at one time had written, "The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes." People like Schiff and Nadler and some of our own people in my party, the Republican Party, supposedly. I'm more of a populist at this point in my life. But they're all supported by somebody behind the scenes and do their bidding. Propaganda, that's a big deal in everything. Buying the newspapers, controlling the media. We're talking right now about all this fake news. Trump is on to them with the fake news. I mean, lying and cheating and stealing. But if you look at the way media is set up in the United States, 6 major media organizations own media. They own radio, they own TV, they own the major newspapers. If the leaders of those, who are typically trilateralists, go to the Bilderberg Society and are NCFR, if they believe that we should have a globalist government, then that will be the editorial policy of what they have in the radio and the TV and the print media. And they will only hire people that will toe the line, the party line, and say that. So, you know, our president is on to them. You know, we're on to them. People in this group are on to him, but the great unwashed masses are not on to him, you know, because they don't think enough, okay? They're busy every day just making a living, admittedly, all right? Edward Bernays wrote a book called Propaganda in 1928. I quote that in my book. How they control the masses. One may assume that news and editorials bear the stamp of the philosophies and political leanings of the owners. The mighty foreign propaganda carried on through these channels in the last 100 years has been one of the causes of wars that has never been discovered. I quote, you know, a fellow named Cooper in 1942, who was with one of the major AP or SP. Anthony Sutton, he's another one of our people, author of Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, wrote, in brief, American companies associated with the Morgan, Rockefeller international investment bankers, not, it should be noted, the vast bulk of independent American industrialists, were intimately related to the growth of Nazi industry. I just kind of touch on that subject, and once again, if I ever get to another book, I'll have a chapter called Trading with the Enemy. Companies like IT&T, and I do quote that in my book at the beginning about industrialists making money. They supplied ingredients for the rocket bombs that fell on London. Selenium cells, blah, blah, blah. It would have been impossible for the German Air Force to kill American and British troops, for the German Army to fight the Allies in Africa, Italy, France, and Germany, or to have had England been bombed, or for Allied ships to have been attacked at sea if IT&T hadn't sold them the stuff they sold them. Patriotic Americans should all be ashamed of the facts discovered by Hagem in his book. It thus came as a severe shock to learn that several of the greatest American corporate leaders were in league with the Nazi corporations before and after Pearl Harbor. Trump doubled down this last spring. I mentioned him already, explaining that despite his push for a stronger military that takes care of the troops, he wants to avoid any wars caused by the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower once warned about. Well, I'm the one, Trump was quoted, well, I'm the one that talks about these wars that are 19 years in Afghanistan and Iraq, and people are just there, and don't kid yourselves, we do have a military-industrial complex. They do like war. Trump criticized the military-industrial complex for using these instances, rogue terrorists in Syria, to agitate for endless wars. You have people here in Washington that they never want to leave. Trump said it in a exacerbated tone, whatever that means. I quoted it. Trump said the Democrats are trying to erase our ancestors' legacy and destroy our proud American heritage, and they are. Communist subversion, I've kind of touched on that already, but you know, they started to get a foothold here, beginning with that, when we recognized them in 1933, we gave them credibility for Russia, and we helped build up their factories, we helped build up their military-industrial complexes in their countries, and it was their weaponry and their tanks and their trucks that fought our troops in Korea. My father served toward the end of the Korean War. His best friend was killed at the Chosin Reservoir when the communist volunteers came across the border because we had whipped the North Koreans, sent them all up to the Yalu River, and had beaten them. We basically won the war. And MacArthur had wanted to bomb them up there with an atomic bomb beyond the Yalu, and Truman wouldn't let him do it, you know, and, which is good. I think it's probably a wise thing. But we had beaten those people. I go into the American Revolution, you know, and about people made money there, and some of the real reasons that what was behind all that. You know, the British needed to make their money back from the 7 Years' War against the French and the Indians, And so they had to tax us and do all the myriad of things they did. So I go into all that. But, you know, I not only talk about these wars, but I talk about the casualties. Because, you know, a lot of people love to write war stories, try to glamorize war. Wars are not glamorous, okay? So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. I've just kind of tried to whet your appetite about some major subjects. You know, I go into American Revolution, Civil War, Spanish American, and Teddy Roosevelt having something to do with getting us into that war and so forth. Banana, banker, and oil wars in Central America and so forth. So I can stop with those. Well, I don't so much come up with solutions. I just define the problem, which is the first step. You know, most people don't know what the problem is. They don't understand what's been happening in history and how history has been set up by these people making money to send us off to wars. So in no uncertain terms, I cover that. I originally was supporting Huckabee in the Republican primary in 1916. And my wife came to me and she said, I don't know who you're voting for in the primary. I'm voting for Trump. My wife figured this out first before I did. And once, you know, she read the Art of the Deal or whatever, one of his books, she said, that guy knows how to negotiate and he's got a history. I know he's imperfect, okay? And she has this little card she takes around, gives to people. He's an imperfect president, but he's perfect for us today. He's our only hope. And to get these Democrats that won these marginal districts in 2018 out of office and good people running against them to take that Congress back, so this silliness of this constant attack for 3 years now against our president will finally stop. There's a bunch of disloyal opposition up there in the Democratic Party. And if you listen to those people, they're not very smart. Okay, they're partisan and they're dedicated to getting rid of Trump because they don't want him to do the things that he's trying to do for the country. They want to project their agenda, and it's the people that are behind them that are silent partners that putting them in office, and they're going after him. They did a deadgum good job, better than we did in 2018. Hopefully we'll be able to get him out of office, yes, and keep the Senate. I tell people my family doesn't make any money, but we serve our country, and we have for 4 generations.